Hello and welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. Today we got some more actual history for you from this book right here, Indian Depredations in Texas by J.W. Wilbarger, published all the way back in 1889. Now today's story takes place out in West Texas, about north of San Angelo and southwest of Abilene. It's called Captain Pureton's Fight on Yellow Wolf Creek. The year 1860 was fraught with many thrilling incidents in Texas. The Indians in that year visited almost every portion of the frontier, and many lives were lost and a vast amount of property was stolen. Several companies were stationed along the frontier border for the protection of the settlers. The command of one of these companies was given to Captain Jack Pureton. As soon as the necessary preparations were made, Captain Jack, with his company, started out in search of the enemy. In a few days he came across an Indian trail leading northwest. This they followed beyond the Double Mountain Fork of the Brazos River, and out into the Staked Plains or the Llano Estacado. They continued on in these dreary plains for 2 days, and they were compelled to abandon the trail for want of water. Their stock of provisions was exhausted, and game was also very scarce in these desolate regions. They therefore turned their course southward, intending to strike the Colorado River or some one of its tributaries. In the meantime, they succeeded in finding a little bad water every day, but for 5 days they had nothing to eat. Finally, their hunters killed a fine fat bear and several deer, and this timely supply relieved their pressing wants, and from thence on they found an abundance of good water and grass. Late in the evening one day they came to an Indian trail leading pretty much in the direction they were traveling. The trail seemed to be several days old, but they followed it until dark and then encamped. The next morning they took the trail again, and about 10 o'clock the spies who had been sent in advance rode to the top of a small mountain, and from its summit they discovered some objects in the distance, but were unable to tell what they were. They hurried on to find out what it was they had seen, and soon discovered that it was a party of Indians going towards the Colorado settlements. The spies hastened back to the company and told Captain Pureton that they had seen Indians. The company pushed ahead on the trail as rapidly as possible, and about 4 o'clock in the evening they discovered the Indians on foot, engaged in shooting prairie dogs with their bows and arrows. The Indians had their camp in the bottom on Yellow Wolf Creek, and were out killing prairie dogs for their supper. The Texans and the Indians discovered each other about the same time, and the Indians at once began to retreat. Captain Pureton, knowing there was no time to be lost, ordered his men to charge them. The order was promptly obeyed, and the Indians, being hard pressed by the Texans, fled into the bottom. But before they could reach it, the Texans poured a deadly fire upon them, killing several and wounding others. Panic-stricken, the rest leaped into the creek and concealed themselves among the drift and thickets along the banks. The Texans then began to search for those who had secreted themselves. One had hidden himself under a willow bush near a large pile of driftwood. James Lane approached the bush where the Indian was hidden and stooped down to look under it. At that instant the Indian shot an arrow at him, which passed through his abdomen and lodged into his backbone, and a second arrow went through his hand. When the fight was over, the Texans went to the Indian camp and took all their camp equipage, consisting of blankets, buffalo robes, 1 rifle, 9 horses and mules, and 10 saddles. Only one Indian made his escape, which he did by mounting a pony bareback. The Texans made a litter on which they carried Mr. Lane to Fort Chadbourne. However, he lived but a few days. So that's the end of this story. This battle took place in 1860, and it actually preceded a battle in which Sol Ross would attack a Comanche camp at Pease River. That'll be the next episode in my series on the Parker family massacre and the events that took place afterwards. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.